Hello friends, a couple of weeks ago I decided to go to my local bookstore. The purpose of that visit was to buy 5 books that were recommended to me by you guys. Every time when you send me a message or leave a comment, I always write each recommendation down. I don't want to forget or miss any of those books, but I always thought that it is kind of unfair to leave this list of book recommendations for my eyes only. So I decided to go to my local bookstore and buy some of the books that you recommended to me. Unfortunately, I couldn't buy all of them because, after all, I don't want to end up bankrupt. In this video, we are going to explore those 5 books that I've bought in my local bookstore, and I think each of those books is a proof of how diverse are our interests of people who gathered around this small book community. Hello friends, I decided to record this part of the video in the forest. You might ask why I decided to record this part of the video about books in a forest, while I guess personal library, where I usually record my videos, is a more appropriate place. It has a better atmosphere. There are 2 reasons for this. The first one is that I believe that forests have this atmosphere in them of ancient philosophical wisdom that helps you to immerse yourself much deeper in the book. This little forest is right near my home, and I come here very often to write down my journals. The second reason for this is that most of the books that you've recommended to me and the ones that I've bought have the atmosphere of this ancient wisdom that I think forests can convey much better than a personal library. Because personal library constantly reminds you of how many books you haven't read, how many books you have on your shelves that are waiting for you for sometimes years, months, weeks, and ask you to read them, while in the forest you can actually focus on the act of reading. It kind of narrows your attention and helps you to dedicate all your attention to a single book that you are currently reading. I'm currently reading one of the books that you've recommended to me. It is YOURCENAR's book called MEMOIRS of HADRIAN. I still don't know how to pronounce his name correctly. In Russian it is pronounced as HADRIAN. In English I think it is HADRIAN. In case if I mispronounce the name of the author and the name of the emperor, please correct me in the comments down below. This book has left me absolutely speechless. I just finished the first chapter of it and I'm in the middle of the second, but it absolutely left me speechless. It kind of blows my mind sometimes to think that you can live for years, for decades, and suddenly discover a book that resonates so closely with you. There is a very interesting idea that the French writer Gustave Flaubert once wrote in his letters. He said that there was a very brief period in human history when the gods had ceased to be and the Christ had not yet come. There was a unique moment in history between Cicero and Marcus Aurelius when man stood alone. I've never thought about it, that there was this gap in the Western history, at least, that when the Christianity hasn't yet come and the ancient gods such as Zeus and Poseidon were kind of losing their power, their influence on human minds. And in this unique gap in history, we had freedom to think the way we want to. This book is perhaps precisely about this. It tells the story of the Emperor Hadrian, who decides to write his memoirs for his successor, Marcus Aurelius. Hadrian is suffering from a severe illness and he knows that he has just weeks to live, and he wants to summarize the key moments of his life, to investigate his life and see what he has learned. And his investigations touch upon all sides of his life. The first chapter of this book is just 10 pages long, and I think I've made around 20 different highlights because there were 20 pieces of wisdom that I couldn't just pass by. This book has a very strong atmosphere of melancholy in it, but it's not an artificial atmosphere of melancholy, but melancholy that comes from ancient wisdom, from philosophical ideas. It is a feeling as if you are sometimes reading a book written not by Marguerite, who lived in the 20th century, but It feels as if you're reading a novel, a story written by Seneca, the Stoic philosopher Seneca. In short, this book has left a very profound influence on me, and I don't care if the next 8 or 9 chapters of this book are going to be really bad. I think, like, if I would judge this book just by its first chapter, it deserves a Nobel Prize for Literature. I don't know if Marguerite YOURCENAR won a Nobel Prize for Literature. Unfortunately, she's no longer alive. I think she really deserved it, at least judging by the very first chapter of this book. Thank you to the person, to the viewer of this channel who recommended it to me. I really appreciate it. I'll send you a private message separately. One of my favorite poets of all time is Goethe, German poet Goethe, and I thought that I own everything that Goethe has ever written. I thought that I have all his scientific writings, all of his poetry, all of his stories and novels. I thought I have it all, but then one of my subscribers decided to send me a message on Instagram and ask me if I knew that Goethe used to write poetry in the style of Persian poets that I admire, such as Rumi, Hafiz, Ferdowsi. And he pointed out, he said, like, you should get this edition of Goethe's poetry, which is called West Eastern Divan. I was left speechless once again. I was like, how could I have missed this book, this part of Goethe's intellectual life and creativity? This poetry is a marriage between Western intelligence and Eastern mysticism. It is absolutely beautiful. I would really recommend it to you. Perhaps I'll read some of the poetry on my podcast, which I'm going to tell you about at the end of this video. Thank you to the person who pointed out to me this book. One of the great things about having a book community is that you can get a very good book recommendations. On my Instagram, I decided to ask you, some of you who are subscribed to my Instagram, if you could recommend me a biography of the French philosopher Simone Weil. I've encountered some of her books, and I think I might transfer now to my personal library and show you those 2 books. I read her short essays, collection of essays. One is called The Power of Words, and another one is called Waiting on God. I was very impressed by the sheer broadness and depth of her thought. She was such a contradictory figure, and you and some of you recommended me to read the biography of her written by Robert Zaretsky. It's called The Subversive Simone Weil, and there is a passage in this biography which explains the nature of Simone Weil and why I find her ideas and her personality so attractive. Zaretsky writes, "It has become a ritual among Weil biographers to sum up her life with a series of contradictions. An anarchist who espoused conservative ideals, a pacifist who fought in the Spanish Civil War, a saint who refused baptism, a mystic who was a labor militant, a French Jew who was buried in the Catholic section of an English cemetery." Just this passage illustrates why Simone Weil attracted me with her ideas, because I think if a thinker, if a philosopher's ideas are coherent, there is a slight danger that this philosopher is not a thinker but an ideologue, a person who wants you to adhere and follow their ideas instead of thinking. Each thinker who truly was revolutionary in their ideas was always contradictory, because the life is complex and every thinker knows that they cannot reach the final answer. Only religious people or leaders of ideologies offer final solutions, while thinkers often know that the truth is inscrutable, that you have to work all your life and the future generations need to look for the truth to find it. There is no final answers to the most important questions in life. Simone Weil was one of them. I've read this book and I enjoyed it a lot. Review of this book is coming soon, but it will take several diary and journal entries for me, at least to temporarily conclude why and what I think about her and this book. So There are 2 books left, and I have to say that the next book that I would like to share with you, when some people recommended it to me, saying that it is exactly something that I would like, I was surprised. Although, as you can see, I'm very connected to nature. I am not so much interested in subjects such as botany or animal behavior or anything like that. It is a kind of my Achilles' heel, you know, it's a thing that unfortunately my curiosity is not drawn upon. When I was recommended this book called The Bedside Book of Birds, an Avian Miscellany by Graham Gibson, I thought, I'm not going to read it, it's unlikely I'm going to buy it, but I found it in a shop and I started flicking through it and fell in love with it. Mainly because this book is not a scientific book that explores the animal behavior. This book is a collection of different beautiful passages that were written by writers such as Charles Darwin or poets such as Ovid. It is more about the symbolism of birds and what they mean to us, beautifully written. When I saw that what Jorge Luis Borges wrote about birds and their symbolism, I just thought that I definitely need to add this book into my library. There are passages from Giorgio Bassani, from Alfred Russel Wallace, from Eduardo Galeano, and many other thinkers across the world, from Latin America to China, from ancient world to our day. Thank you all. I think there were 5 or 6 people who separately on their own recommended me this book. Thank you all for directing my attention to this one. And the last book that I wanted to talk about in this video, unfortunately it hasn't arrived yet. In fact, there is one shop that might have that book. Let's check it out. Hello.
Hi.
And they had the book. I also bought the book on Borges, but it wasn't recommended by you guys. Anyway, excited about finally finding Nietzsche in Italy. Italy is one of my favorite places on earth, and Nietzsche is one of the philosophers that had the most profound influence on my way of thinking. The marriage of those two makes Guy de Portales' book as a essential to be read book in my reading list. What is interesting is that there is this very strong connection between Nietzsche and Italy. He spent a lot of time there, mainly because of his ill health, and doctors advised Italian climate for him. So he spent a lot of time in Florence, in Rome, in Turin. Unfortunately, spent the last weeks of his sane life in Turin. He broke down in Turin Square and lost his sanity and couldn't write anything after that. So I was really curious to see the investigation into this part of Nietzsche's life, because it seems that Italy, with its ancient culture, with its ancient ideas, had a very profound influence on Nietzsche's way of thinking. It is going to be very interesting to see how Italy has influenced Nietzsche, and I think I've read around 5 or 6 different biographies of Nietzsche, and if you ask me, I would recommend Suprido's biography of Nietzsche and John Gag's Hiking with Nietzsche, which explores Nietzsche's biography and ideas through a personal perspective. I've interviewed John Gag on my podcast. The link will be down in the description if you are interested. Right, those were 5 books that you've recommended to me, and I really enjoyed recording this video in the forest. I have to be honest, the first time when I tried to record this video was in my personal library, and for some reason I couldn't record it. There was something that stopped me from speaking, from formulating my thoughts, and I think it was because of all the distractions that I was surrounded by all the books that remind me that I haven't read them. It was much easier to record this video right here. There's something calming, something that helps me to focus when I sit here. Before we'll go, there are 2 things that I would like to tell you. First of all, thank you all for your lovely messages of congratulations to the birth of my daughter. Thank you so much. It really touched my heart. I never thought that I'm going to build such a community and there are going to be so many people that will congratulate me with such an important part of my life. And the second thing that I would like to say, I want to launch a separate solo podcast and call it Genius and Ink. In fact, I started recording the first episodes, and the purpose of that podcast is to be more spontaneous and tell you about the passages, beautiful passages that I encounter in books in the format that, and tell you what I think about those passages, analyze them and have a conversation with all of you. And I want to make this podcast weekly. I was wondering if you'll be interested to, let's say, if we sit down over an audio podcast and discuss a couple of passages from this lovely book on birds, for example. Just talk about the passage, for example, from Jorge Luis Borges and what he said about the symbolism of birds, and discuss it in audio format. I was wondering, what do you think about this idea? Would you listen to something like that? In any case, let me know what you think down in the comments. It will help me. Maybe you have suggestions of how I can make it better, what exactly you would like to hear on that podcast. Any idea, any suggestion would be super helpful. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.